Dairine paused. Certainly this place was what she had thought she wanted, a big cosmopolitan area full of intelligent alien creatures. But at the same time there were hardly any hominids, and she felt bizarrely out of place. Which was all wrong. She wanted some place where she would be able to make sense of things. But how to get that across to the computer? It seemed as though, even though it was magical, it still used and obeyed the laws of science, and was as literal and unhelpful as a regular computer could be if you weren't sufficiently familiar with it to know how to tell it what you wanted. "I want to go somewhere else," she said to the machine. "Define parameters," said the computer. "Tell me what kind of syntax I should use." "Command syntax. Normal syntactical restrictions do not apply in the help facility. Commands and appended arguments may be stated in colloquial vernacular form. Parameters may be subjected to manual analysis and discussion if desired." "Does that mean I can just talk to you?" Dairine said. "Affirmative." "And you'll give me advice?" "Affirmative." She let out a breath. "Okay," she said. "I want to go somewhere else." "Acknowledged. Executing." "No, don't!" Dairine said, and several of the aliens around her reacted to the shriek. One of the holly tree people, standing nearby in something like a flower pot, had several eyes fall off on the floor. "Overridden," said the computer. "Help facility," Dairine said, breathing hard. Her heart was pounding. "Online." "Why did you start doing that?" "OK is a system command causing an exit from the help facility and a return to command level," said the computer. "Do not run any program until I state the full command with arguments and end the sequence with run." "Affirmative," said the computer. Syntax change confirmed. "Oh, Lord," Dairine thought, "I've started messing with the syntax and I don't even understand it. I will never use a program again till I've read the docs." "Good," she said. "The following is a string of parameters for a world I want to transit to. I will state end of list when finished." "Affirmative. Awaiting listing." "Right. I want to go somewhere else." "Transit agenda confirmed. Specific arguments, please." She thought. "I want to go somewhere where there are going to be people like me." "Noted. Next argument." "What exactly am I looking for? Darth Vader?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I think I'll wait a bit on that one. I want to go somewhere where I'm expected," she said. "Noted. Next argument." "Somewhere where I can use some of this magic." "Argument already applies," said the computer. "You are using wizardry at this time." Dairine made a face. "Somewhere where I can sit down and figure out what it means." "Argument already applies. Documentation is available at this time." Dairine sighed. "Somewhere where I will have time to sit down and figure out what it means." "Incomplete argument. State time parameter." "A couple of days, 48 hours, she said then, before it could correct her syntax. "Noted. Next argument." "Somewhere—" One more time she stopped, considering the wild number of variables she was going to have to specify, and the truth was, she didn't know what she was after. Except... She looked around her conspiratorially, as if someone might overhear her. Indeed, she would have died if, say, Nita should ever hear this. "Somewhere I can do something," she whispered. "Something big. Something that matters." "Noted," said the computer. "Next argument." The embarrassment of the admission out loud had driven everything out of her head. "End arguments," she said. "Advisory," said the computer. "So advise me." Stated number of arguments defines a very large sample of destinations. Stated number of arguments allows for interference in transit by other instrumentalities. Odds of interference, approximately 96%. That brought Dairine's chin up. "Let 'em try," she said. "The arguments stand." Instruction accepted. End advisory. "Fine. List program." Transit program. Sort for Terran-type hominids along maximal spacetime curvature. Sort for anticipated arrival, time continuum maximal but skewed to eliminate paradox. Sort for opportunity for intervention. Sort for data analysis period on close order, 48 hours. Sort for intervention curve skewed to maximal intervention and effect. End list. You got it, Dayreen said. Name listed program Trip 1. Named. Save it. Exit help facility. Trip 1 saved. Command level, said the computer. Run Trip 1. Running. Input required. Dayreen rolled her eyes at the mile-high ceiling. Nita doesn't do it this way, she thought. I've watched her. She just reads stuff out of her book or says it by heart. Oh well, someone has to break new ground. She stretched her legs out in front of her to keep them from cramping. Specify, she said. Birth date? 20 October 1978, she said, looking out across the floor at the great crowd of pushing and jostling aliens. Place of birth? 385 East 86th Street, New York City. The hospital had long since burned down, but Dayreen knew the address. Her dad had taken them all there to a German restaurant now on the site. Time of birth? 12:55 a.m. Favorite color? You have got to be kidding, she said, looking at a particularly busy knot of aliens across the floor. Security guards, most likely. They were armed, in a big group, and looking closely at people. Favorite color? Blue. Or were these critters security guards? There had been other creatures walking around in the terminal wearing uniforms, as much or as little clothing of a particular shade of silvery green as each alien in question felt like wearing, and their weapons had been slim little blue metal rods strapped to them. These creatures, though, they wore no uniforms, and their weapons were large and dark and looked nasty. Last book read, said the computer. Look, Dayreen said, what do you need to know this dumb stuff for? Program cannot be accurately run without the enacting wizard's personal data. You have no data file saved at this time. She made another face. Better not interfere, she thought, or you might wind up doing the breaststroke in lava after all. Oh, go on, she said. Last book read? The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, said Dayreen, looking with increasing unease at the armed bunch of aliens. They were not nice-looking people. Well, lots of the people in here didn't look nice, that purple jello thing, for one, but none of them felt bad, just weird. But these creatures with the guns, they had an unfriendly look to them. Most of them were mud-colored, warty-looking creatures, like a cross between lizards and toads, but upright and not nearly as pretty as a lizard, or as helplessly homely as any toad. They went about with a lumpish, hunchbacked swagger, and their eyes were dark-slitted bulges, or fat, crimson, bloodshot goggle eyes. They looked stupid, and worse, they looked cruel. Oh, come on, Dayreen told herself in disgust. Just because they're ugly doesn't mean they're bad. Maybe it's just some kind of military expedition, like soldiers coming through the airport on their way home for leave. But with their guns? Father's name, said the computer. Harold Edward Callahan, said Dayreen. She was looking with a combination of interest and loathing at one of the warty creatures, which was working its way toward her. In one arm it was cradling a gun with a barrel big enough to shove a hero sandwich down. In its other hand, a knobby, three-fingered one, it held the end of a leash, and straining at the leash's far end was something that looked more like the stuffed Deinonychus at Natural History than anything Dayreen had ever seen. A skinny little dinosaur it was, built more or less along the lines of a Tyrannosaurus, but lithe and small and fleet. This one went all on its hind legs, its long, thin tail stretched out behind it for balance. It went with a long-legged, ostrichy gait that Dayreen suspected could turn into an incredible sprint. The dinosaur on the warty alien's leash was dappled in startling shades of iridescent red and gold, and it had its face down to the floor as it pulled its master along, and the end of that long whip-like tail thrashed. And then it looked up from the floor and looked right at Dayreen with eyes that were astonishingly innocent and as blue as a Siamese cat's. It made a soft, mewling noise that nonetheless pierced right through the noise of the terminal. The warty thing looked right at Dairine, too, and cried out in some language the computer didn't translate. The sound was a bizarre soprano singing of notes like a synthesizer playing itself. Then it yanked the leash sharply and let the Deinonychus go. Dairine scrambled to her feet as the Deinonychus loped toward her. Terrified as she was, she knew better than to try to run away from this thing. She slammed the computer screen closed and waited. No kicks, she told herself. If one kick doesn't take this thing out, you'll never have time for a second. It leaped at her, but she was already swinging. Dairine hit the Deinonychus right in the face with the computer and felt something crunch. Oh, please don't let it be the plastic, she thought, and then the impetus of the Deinonychus carried it right into her. Its broken jaw knocked against her face as it fell, and she almost fell with it. Dairine stumbled back, found her footing, turned, and began to run. Behind her, more voices were lifted. Dairine ran like a mad thing, pushing through crowds wherever she could. Who are they? Why are they after me? And where do I run? She dodged through a particularly dense crowd and paused, looking for a corridor to run down, a place to hide. Nothing. This part of the crossings was one huge floor, very few niches to take advantage of. But farther on, about half a mile away, it looked like the place narrowed. She ran. The noise behind her was deafening. There was some shooting. She heard the scream of blaster bolts, the sound that had set her blood racing in the movies. But now it wasn't so exciting. One bolt went wide over her head. It hit a low-floating bit of the ceiling off to one side of her, and she smelled the stink of scorched plastic and saw a glob of it fall molten to splat on the floor. Dairine sprinted past it, panting. She was a good runner, but she couldn't keep this up for much longer. Bug-eyed monsters, her brain sang at her in terror. These weren't what I had in mind. What are they? Emissaries, said the computer, in a muffled voice, since its screen was shut over its speaker. Dairine kept running. From where? Indeterminate. Continue run. If it'll get me out of here, yes. Last level of education finished? She told it, gasping, as she ran. She told it her mother's maiden name, and how much money her father made, and at what age she had started reading, and much more useless information. And then, while she was telling it what she thought of boys, something caught her by the arm. It was a three-fingered hand, knobby, a slick dark green, and strong with a terrible soft strength that pulled her right out of her run and around its owner as if she were spinning around a pole. Dairine cried out at her first really close look at a bug-eyed monster. Its eyes were an awful milky red that should have meant it was blind, but they saw her too well entirely, and it sang something high at her and grabbed her up against it with its other hand, the nonchalant, don't-hurt-it grasp of the upper arms that adults use on children, not knowing how they hate it, or not caring. Dairine abruptly recognized the Bem's bug-eyed monsters song as laughter, once removed from the horrible low laughing she had seemed to hear in transit. And suddenly she knew what these things were, if not who. "No!" she screamed. "Intervention subroutine," said the computer, utterly calm. Dairine struggled against the thing, couldn't get leverage. All the self-defense she had been taught was for use on humans, and this thing's mass was differently distributed. Not too far away, she heard more of the horrid fluting. Bems with guns, coming fast. Half her face was rammed up against its horrible hide, and her nose was full of a stink like old damp coffee grounds. Her revulsion was choking her. The grasp of the thing on her was as unhuman as if she were being held by a giant cockroach, and Dairine hated bugs. "Kill it!" she screamed. And something threw her back clear a good 20 feet and knocked her head against the floor. Dairine scrambled up. The Bem was gone. Or rather, it wasn't a Bem anymore. It was many, many little pieces of Bem, scattered among splatters of dark liquid all over the floor and all over everything else in the area, including her. Everything smelled like an explosion in a coffee shop.